So, how does working the 12 steps of addiction recovery, founded in Alcoholics Anonymous, change our appetite for food? I will tell you how that experience happened for me. The 12 steps of addiction recovery, you will find those everywhere. Basically, anywhere you find a community built up around an addiction, you'll find these. And the reason why is because the steps are actually really universal. None of these are addiction specific. Of all the 12 steps, only one even mentions the word addiction, and that's the first step. That's where you say, hey, you have an addiction, and what you've been trying thus far hasn't worked too good. Maybe try something else. And after that, all of the rest of the steps are designed to really unravel your addiction in new and beautiful ways. And that happens by inviting your higher power into that space with you, because he provides the relief that you were hoping that food would do for you. And each step is designed to do that. So how does it change your appetite? So I have to tell you first, before I get into it, there are two ways you can work the program of Overeaters Anonymous. Well, maybe more than that, but I'll just, for the purposes of this video, I will say two. A lot of people start by trying to identify what they call their trigger foods, or their red foods, or their alcoholic foods. And they're like, okay, in order for me to successfully work the steps, I have to get those out of my life and make sure I'm never eating them again. I'm going to commit to abstinence from those things, and now I'm going to spend my time wrestling that out of my life while trying to do the 12 steps. Well, there's another way, in my opinion, a much better way, which is to recognize that by working the 12 steps, honestly, the food is just going to take care of itself. It will totally change your appetite. So save that energy, and instead of trying to fight the food, just trust that the food truly will take care of itself as you do the 12 steps. Now, the reason that this works is because the 12 steps is kind of broken up into two phases, and I've talked about this already in some of these other videos. I'm not sure where you are on the progression of these videos, so I'll go back to this very quickly. When you look at addiction recovery, it really happens in two phases. Steps 1 through 9 are the first phase, and then you have the second phase, 10, 11, and 12. Now let me explain that in more detail. Let me give you the analogy of a hoarder. If you wanted to do an intervention for someone who was a hoarder, probably the first thing you do is show up with a box of black trash bags and you start gathering trash and throwing it away. Over time, you're going to find that that house gets clean and beautiful, and you can stand there and see the light coming in, and it feels really good. But the problem is that house is still not going to get clean and stay clean if the hoarder does not learn and institute the practice of daily pickup. They have to learn and practice how to learn and fold away, or fold in their clothes and put them away every day, wash their dishes and put them away, pick up garbage as they go. That's how they will maintain a clean house. So similarly, in addiction recovery, it's important to recognize that what we're doing, what we're actually recovering from, isn't really so much our addiction as much as it is the thing that sends us into our addiction. When we are moving into a place where we're trying to control or misuse food, whether that's eating too much or too little, or binging and purging, whatever that looks like for you, what we're doing is we are in a place where we are so emotionally / spiritually dysregulated that we're just trying to find relief. We have a buildup of pain happening in our lives. Fear, resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, in all of its various forms that build up and make us really, really uncomfortable spiritually and emotionally. And we're just trying to find a way to feel better. That's where our addiction comes in, because it works really well. Our addiction is amazing at helping us feel better. Even though it might just be for a period of time, it does change our state and we feel better. And so we aren't running into our addiction because we have no power over our addiction, as much as it is we are looking for power, and our addiction gives it to us for a moment. Power to calm a craving, power to help us to feel better, power to whatever it is. And for a moment, that addiction is the most important thing to us in the world, because it's giving us something we really, really need. I'll give you another lesson and example I learned in therapy years ago that really applies here to help you understand how working the 12 steps of addiction recovery will very naturally change your appetite. When I was in therapy years ago, one of the things they talked about was how they were definitely going to teach us the skills of how to have better interpersonal relationships, how to manage emotions, all that kind of stuff. But then there was another thing we had to learn, which is that when we are in crisis mode, when we are in fight or flight, those other skills, like, we can't access them and apply them. We're in a different place in our brain. So when we're there, when we are in crisis mode, when we're in fight or flight, we have to apply a different set of skills to get us out of fight or flight, so that we can now apply the other skills we learned when we were in a place of calm. As for the addicts, this is applicable. because you might be someone who knows how to eat well and exercise, and you can't figure out how you're in this pattern with the food over and over again when you know better, or you know it's hurting you, or you know it's hurting other people, and you understand the havoc it's creating in your life. So how could you keep going into this? Well, this is how. When you are in a place of fight or flight and your nervous system is super activated, you need relief. You don't care about calories in and calories out. You don't care about what your body looks like. You don't care about anything except I have to feel better. And your addiction is so effective at helping you to feel better and to move you out of that place and to calm your nervous system. Even though there are a lot of after effects and, there's a fallout from engaging in it for a moment, it does what we most need. Our highest need is met at that time. So the way the 12 steps work, well, ultimately, it's not about the 12 steps. The 12 steps really are just kind of a blueprint for how to navigate your way to your higher power and ask your higher power for help. And always, 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 you are only one prayer and one miracle away from your higher power being able to come in and give you the change that you are looking for, the relief that you need. And I will tell you that your higher power does it better, faster, and it lasts way longer than the food ever did. And when you have that experience, especially when you open yourself to having that experience over and over and over again, you will be able to build a relationship of trust with your higher power that is nothing compared to the relationship of trust you've already built with your addiction. And we do have a relationship of trust with our addiction. We know after years of experience that we can go to our addiction for this emotional outcome. Now you have to learn to build that same relationship of trust with your higher power. Give him an opportunity to show up. So for me, it took a little bit longer to figure this out because I'm pretty stubborn. So even though I know today, Wednesday afternoon, I did it and it felt good, well, on Thursday afternoon, when I need help again, I'm not sure it's going to happen as good or feel as good or last as long, so maybe I'm not going to try it this time. It took me a minute to do it over and over again and trust that no matter what, no matter how dysregulated I was, no matter how big the problem seemed, always, 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 I was one prayer and one miracle away from the relief that I needed. And always, 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 that relief came better, faster, and lasted way longer than the food ever gave me. I did both side by side. I didn't spend my energy trying to wrestle with food and give it up. I spent my energy trying to practice and practice and practice, dialing in this exchange with my higher power so that he could show up and give me that relief. The 12 Steps of Addiction Recovery really outline that fairly simply. Please read the book. I'll put a link below on where you can find or read that book online or listen to it for free. You could get a copy of it for a few dollars at a thrift store. It's the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And I prefer that one over the Overeaters Anonymous text because that book, it doesn't spend the time trying to get you to wrestle food out of your life, which is such a waste of your energy. Recovery minutes matter. We want to get to the other side as soon as possible. So for me, I spent my time there. And that book goes over the details of how to work these steps pretty briefly because they're that simple and that beautiful. They are introduced in step 5. They're further explained. They're introduced in chapter 5. They're further explained in chapter 6. And chapter 7 is one chapter dedicated to step 12. So they're not that complicated. I think the thing that makes them complicated is the game of telephone that we see across, generations of 12-step programs that have tended to make it more complicated than it needs to be. But as you spend your time there and dial in how to allow your higher power to come into that space and give you relief, your recovery comes as you trust it enough to keep instituting that exchange, to keep initiating that exchange. Every time you feel that emotional dysregulation, it takes that awareness to be like, I'm uncomfortable. Okay, I'm not even sure why, but let me ask my higher power, what's going on with me? Like, am I being selfish, resentful, fearful? What's affecting me? Oh, I see what it is. Okay, God, can you take that away from me? And so, it gets into a little bit more deeply, but that's kind of the essence of it. And so for me, I'm at a place in my life where if I ever have a food thought or a food craving, I don't really get food cravings anymore, but if I have one, I can recognize that all that is a reflection of something emotional and spiritual that I'm holding that I need to let go of. Let me give you an example of this. So several years ago, this was a few months after I had found addiction recovery, like I had totally was food neutral, living in a really good space, but it still was fairly new. It was just a few months. And I was driving home one day, and all of a sudden I had a thought of food. It wasn't even a craving anymore at that point, but I had a food thought of, hey, I should stop in at Dollar General and get an ice cream Snickers. And I live in Alabama. There's basically a Dollar General on every corner. And I was in the middle of a 1-hour drive home. I had gone to take my son to a day camp, and we were on the way home. And I had that thought, I should stop and get an ice cream Snickers. I'm like, whoa, that was weird. I haven't thought about an ice cream Snickers in a long time. And I kept driving, and then I had the thought again, I should totally stop and get an ice cream Snickers. And I'm like, well, hang on. Like, I haven't thought about an ice cream Snickers in months. And I hadn't restricted it out of my diet. It's just that it was something that I realized, I reach for it because I'm using it to change my emotional state. But once I had dialed in this process, I just wasn't hungry for that kind of stuff anymore. I mean, I still enjoy sweets. I still enjoy ice cream. But, like, just casually through the day, if I'm not hungry, like, I'm not feeling like I want to eat anything. And so I hadn't been eating them just naturally. I hadn't really felt like eating them anymore. But I recognized that had been a binge food of mine. And so when I thought it, I was like, if I'm thinking about this binge food, something I exclusively ate as a binge food, then I must be holding on to something. So I stepped back and I'm like, okay, well, where am I in those maintenance steps, those daily pickup steps, 10 and 11 and 12? And I will tell you that 100% of the time, a food craving or a food thought is originating from something from one of those three, one or some of those three. So immediately I stepped back because I saw the clue. The food thought was my clue that something was going on that I hadn't immediately recognized I needed to let go of. So I thought, okay, well, where am I with step 10? And step 10 is identifying things as they come up, the emotional dysregulations as they come up and giving them to God. So I'm like, okay, well, where am I holding on to fear or resentment, selfishness or dishonesty? And I realized, I'm afraid, because that day, as I was driving to my son to camp, my transmission started slipping, and so it was freaking me out. I'm like, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my car, and I don't have the money to fix it, and what am I going to do? And so I was like, I have to give that fear to God. I also recognized there was a relationship in my life that I kept trying to control, so I had to give that to God too. So I recognized those, and I said a prayer as I was driving. Okay, God, can you please remove this fear from me? I trust that things will work out with the car, whatever that looks like. I give it to you. I'll spend my energy doing other things and maybe looking for solutions instead of sitting here and worrying about how you're going to do your job. And I give you this other relationship. I'm just trying to control things, and I'm trying to do your job. So then I'm like, okay, so we're good on step 10. So where am I with step 11? Step 11 is that conscious contact we make with God, where we intentionally spend time with him each day, in prayer or meditation or whatever that looks like for you. The things that help you to feel connected to God. And I thought, well, where am I with step 11? I realized that the last 3 nights in a row, when I had put my son to bed, I'd fallen asleep with him. I was so exhausted from driving him back and forth to camp every day. I was so tired, I just fell asleep with him on his bed, and in the middle of the night got up and moved to mine. Well, at the time, I was in the habit of, at night before bed, I would do my step 11 work. I would, meditate and pray and those kinds of things. And so I hadn't done it for 3 days in a row. And here I was, very suddenly, craving an ice cream Snickers. It's like, that totally makes sense. I've slept on 11, and I'm holding on to something I had to do with step 10. Where am I with 12? I'm like, I'm good with 12. I'm doing what step 12 asks, which is to, keep rinsing and repeating, doing these things, and share the message with other people. And I had been doing phone calls with people to share with them the message of recovery. So I'm like, I'm good on 12, but 10 and 11, they needed a little tweaking. So I made those tweaks, and voila, the craving went away. And like I said, it wasn't even a craving at that point, because I had dialed in the program enough that it was just a food thought. And so now I have recognized and witnessed the progression. I get emotionally dysregulated, then I have a food thought, and then the thought turns into a craving, and the craving turns into an obsession, and then the obsession turns into a binge. And so now, though, I have become so self-aware through practicing this process, that as soon as I'm emotionally dysregulated, I'm like, I don't feel well, I got to give this to God. Now, from time to time, there are times that I still find myself feeling like a little extra snacky or whatever, or having some food thoughts, and I'm like, where did that come from? I must be holding on to something that I wasn't aware of. So I will pause, often I'll just go to my room and literally kneel in prayer and say, God, what am I holding on to? I'm feeling this snackiness. I know it's always going to come from 10 and 11 and or 12. So where am I? What's going on? And he'll show me. And I'll be like, I'm afraid of this. Yeah, I need to give that to you. And this happened a few days ago. I am years on the other side of my recovery. I'm not dealing with food stuff really at all. But the other day, like 4 days ago, I came home and I wanted to eat, and I don't usually eat after dinner anymore. And so I was feeling a little snacky, and I'm like, well, that's weird. I'm not mad about anything, or I wasn't afraid of anything. I'm like, well, that's weird that I feel a little snacky. So I knelt in prayer, and I was like, what is going on with me? What am I missing? And then it was like, oh, I'm resentful. I was mad at a member of my family. There had been a little bit of drama that day, and I was holding on to something. I'm like, oh yeah, that happened. I forgot. I am feeling kind of frustrated about that still. And I thought I had let go, but I wasn't. And it wasn't until that night when I was a little snacky that I saw the clue. That was a clue that I'm holding on to something. Where am I at? And so I dialed it in, and that was a few days ago. And I haven't had that snacky feeling since. So it's really kind of incredible how this works. And that's how working the 12 steps of addiction recovery has naturally and very organically changed my appetite. Today I'm a normal eater. I'm not a food addict pretending to be a normal eater or white knuckling my way into being a normal eater. I just am a normal eater. And so it's really amazing. So my appetite is always now, and it was a reflection of where I am in my spiritual work. So before, I got to be over 300 pounds, and that happened little by little over time. And it was the natural result and byproduct of me eating what, when, and how I wanted. But now the weight loss for me, the difference in my life now also is the byproduct. I mean, I've lost over 120 pounds. I'm still losing weight. And so that is also the very natural byproduct of eating what, when, and how I want to. What is the thing that changed? Something changed me so that what, how, and when I eat is different. How I want to is different than how it used to be. And that difference only is me dialing in the step work, especially 10 and 11 and 12, because that's the daily work we'll do. Steps 1 through 9, kind of once and done. You can do that in a couple weeks, but you stay in 10 and 11 and 12, and it will very naturally and organically erode your appetite into being something completely different, and it's miraculous. And there's no question in my mind about who did it, because it wasn't me, because I didn't give up the food first before it happened. I was in the middle of the food and saw my appetite naturally change as a result of the work that God was doing in my life in the middle of my mess. So I hope that's helpful to you. Thanks.